My dad was really a quiet person. Didn't have a lot to say, except once in a while when he'd get excited. But he was really kind, considerate, and trusting. That's the thing. Maybe it's because he needed our help when we were so young on the farm. But he was so trusted us with so much, trusted us so much. We drove tractors when we were really young to do things. We would irrigate because we were flood irrigated back in those years, and he would send us out, and we'd go out for most of the day to irrigate potatoes or hay or whatever it was, and there's where I had some experiences there. But he was trusting and kind and just a good, righteous man. And I don't know whether to tell this one on my dad, but one Sunday after we'd come home from up there, I'd got a little bottle of disappearing ink. And so I went in the kitchen, and it was between meetings. My dad was sitting in his Sunday clothes with a white shirt in the front room in his chair, and I showed my mother, and she thought that was funny, and so she says, "Okay, you get a little in your cup and you go in and ask your dad what color it is," because my dad was colorblind. And I said, "Okay," and she says, "I'll come in and bump your arm and we'll spill it on him." And so I went in and I said, "Dad, what color is this?" And I had a little bit in the cup, and I had it right there, and she came in and says, "Here, let me look." And she hit my arm, and it went all down his shirt. "For hell's sake!" And I still see my mother just hee and then laughing. And then he sat there and wondered, and then in a second it just started and all the blue went out of his shirt, but it was a little wet. But anyway, we enjoyed doing those kind of things. One of the interesting things about my dad, that he became quite famous around the country, all around southern Utah, as being a water witch, what they called a water witch. And I don't know what power it takes to do it. All I can tell you is it works. And what he'd do, he would get a forked stick or green branch, and he would hold that branch in his hands like this with the fork coming out, and it would go out. And then he would walk along the ground, and whenever it would come to water, the stick would start bending down like that. And he would hold it, and the stronger it went, the better the water was underground. Most people would try it and couldn't do it, but he would take your hand with one hand if you wanted, and you could take the other hand on the stick, and he would have his hand on the stick, and you'd hold it and walk along and doing it, holding on to him, and whenever it would come to water, it would go down. And you could hold it just as tight as you could trying to hold it, and you couldn't hold it. Some guys that were really strong, and there was some of the time that they'd almost break the bark loose on the limb trying to hold it, and it was pulled down so strong. People would have him from all around come and witch for wells for him, and they would drill where he told them that's where the water was. And a lot of the wells in this valley was drilled where he showed them that there was water under there, and there was good water. And if it wasn't very good, they wouldn't drill until they found a spot where it was good. One time we even took him over into Nevada. Well, he went over for others, but we got on a little project once over there and was looking for water for Morley Wilson, and my dad went over there and witched the well, and it was a big old gushing well when they drilled it and pumped it over there. And so he was known and asked all over this area to come and witch wells for him and witch for water. It's quite interesting. Don't know what the power was, and he didn't know either. All we knew is that it worked and so forth. But And others can do that, and others do them different ways. Some just would use a wire, a barbed wire or something, but my dad always used a willow and never did get a dry hole that I know of anywhere that he was asked to witch. My mother was quite stern, but yet she was really a loving person. She too liked to do things for others, and especially people when they would get sick. Of course, at different times we didn't have a doctor in town or close, and so she was famous for making what they called mustard plasters for people when they'd get pneumonia or have a real bad cough or something. She would make those, and people from all over town, I can remember, would call her to come and make those things, which was really hot, which would help draw that pneumonia out of them. So she was always doing things like that. Like say, she was a little stern at times with us, and maybe I deserved that just a little bit. But just a couple of things that I remember about her, and isn't it interesting how you remember certain things? But I remember on my 10th birthday, she gave me a good whipping with a fly swatter. I don't know what it did. I probably deserved it. I don't know what it was, but what I remember is it was my birthday, and I remember going into the bedroom, and there was a chest of drawers in there, and there was a crib in there that was for when she had a baby and younger. But I can remember of sitting down between those a-crying, and I remember her coming in, and she took me by the hand and sat on the bed and pulled me up and apologized to me for whipping me so hard, and she cried and told me she loved me and she was sorry that she had done that. And I really appreciated her doing that, even though I probably deserved what I got. Talking about my mother, another experience with her that I remember is Theron and I wanted to go sleep up to our Grandma and Grandpa Randall's place one time, and she didn't really want us to and wasn't excited about it, but she finally let us. And for some reason, I don't know how or what, but we caught what they called the 7-year itch up there. And I don't know, only that it was really itchy. But what I really remember is her giving us a bath, because we were quite young. We was, I don't know how old, 3, 4, 5, something like that. Must have been. Theron was 3 years older than me, so I don't know. Anyway, what I remember is after the bath, her rubbing us down with some white lotion that stung like crazy. Just burned, and we cried and then run around the house naked trying to cool off because it was burning so bad. And she said, "That's what you get. That's what you get. You stay home and sleep in your own beds." I remember that about it, and I thought, oh man, I'll never forget this. But the other thing that I remember about her was when I was 6 years old, and I don't know why it was or what I had at that age with my teeth or something, but she had taken me to see her. It seemed like it was the dentist, but it might have been the doctor. I don't know which. But that was in 1948, and there was a big snowstorm that winter in 1948. Like I say, I was 6 years old, and we was over there, and we got snowed in. And we was there for 2 or 3 days. And I remember some of the men that were there that was snowed in. The mailman couldn't get through, who carried the mail and come from Enterprise, and we stayed in a hotel there. And I can remember, what I remember is they took a picture of me and my mother reading me a funny book, a Gene Autry funny book. And our picture was put in the newspaper. And I thought that was pretty neat. But when we left to come home, I can remember the snowbanks where they'd plowed the road. The snow was more than 2 or 3 times higher than the car. They had to throw it up that high to get it off the road and out. Fence posts were covered. It was higher than fence posts. You couldn't see fences anywhere. It was a real big storm back then. But I guess one other thing to remember is her dad was one of them that was over there because...
No, what I was going to say.
Because he, I can't remember how I come up with a dime. That was a lot of money at that age, a silver dime. Anyway, I said, ha, 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 I got a dime. And he says, that isn't a dime. And he probably knew it was, but I said, yes, it is. He says, that's a nickel. And I said, no, that's a dime. He said, I'll bet you a dime it's not. I said, okay. And so I showed it to him. He says, yep, that's a dime. So he gave me another dime. And I still remember that. And I can still see him laughing when he was doing it. But he was sure a good man. And I remember that as a 6-year-old.
My dad was a tease. He was a happy person. He enjoyed doing jokes on other people, but he had a hard time taking a joke himself. But he was really well liked by everybody. He worked at the store for many years. He was a truck driver for many years in my growing up, younger years. And then when Mazer moved to St. George, why he took over the store. But he had a good relationship with everybody in town. Everybody loved Dad. He was just a good man, very spiritual, had a strong testimony. Whenever you'd hear him bear his testimony, you could just feel it so strong. He was a good man. He would invite the high councilmen to come and eat dinner with us whenever they come in from Nevada, because they didn't have anywhere to go and they spend the whole day here. And so he would have them come over and eat dinner with us. But he had a certain glass, a real fancy goblet, that in the leaves, in one of them was a hole. And so he would always put that out for one of the high councilmen. And whenever they took a drink, why, it just went right down. And he would just sit there and he'd just laugh and laugh. And when I was younger, I remember him having parties up there all the time. And they had one of these whoopee cushions, even back then. And he brought one of those home from California. And they were having a big party there that night. And he put it up underneath the couch cushion. And every time somebody new came in and they sat down and it just went off. And oh my gosh, if he didn't have a ball doing that, and then he'd hurry and do it for the next one. But they used to let me stay up and watch what they were doing and enjoy the people. And one of the big things that they did was he brought home a record player that cut your own records. And so they had these little program things that they would act out like they used to do on old radio shows all the time, where they do the sound effects and change their voices and everything. And these guys would, one of them especially was one of the guys going to a ball game. And he had too much to drink, and he'd stumble up the stairs, and they had somebody do all of the sound effects. And then it was just funny to watch them and then listen to it after and see what they come up with. But that was a big thing when they had all of these people come over and cut those records. It was fun to listen to. He was in a quartet, and for years and years and years they sang in a quartet in town and other places. There was him and his brothers, Mazer and Merrill, and Ivan Holt, and who's the other Holt? Oh,
Howard?
Howard Holt. And they would sing. You've heard the Terry boys sing with Randy and his boys. They did that. They were really good. And Aunt Loree played for him all the time. And but he learned the violin from Uncle Hebe Holt. Uncle Hebe was Stan Holt's dad. It was Grandma Terry's brother, Uncle Hebe. And anyway, he taught him the violin. I don't know how old he was, probably still young in years, but they used to even play for dances. And then he always played for the string band for years and years and years. So, for as long as I can remember.
She said he liked to play jokes on people but couldn't take a joke. When we were dating, I was in high school and I was a member of the FFA and Future Farmers of America. And each year we'd go to Salt Lake to the FFA convention. And one of the favorite things for me to do was go to the novelty shop and get tricks and things and bring home. So I got a rubber,
Vomit.
looked like vomit. And it was just ugly looking stuff.
It was terrible.
So one night I took it over to their place, and while her dad was in the kitchen, I put it on the floor. It was actually on a rug, was it?
The mat as you come in the front door.
And set it there, and then we went and sat on the couch and waited for him to come through the door into the room. And because they had cats, and there was a cat in the house once in a while. He come in, looked down, saw that, and he about had a fit. He says, "Get this out of here!" And he picked that up and started. Oh no, that he didn't do that. That was Aunt Roxy when I was home teaching.
He hollered at me.
Oh, he hollered at. What did he say to you?
He said, "Colleen, what's that cat doing in the house again?" So anyway. And then I think you picked it up, didn't you?
Yeah, I picked it up, and then
he found it was a joke on him, and so it was not very fun.
What I was thinking about was when I went home teaching, I took it home teaching. Me and Arla Salger was home teachers, and we went over to Uncle Eve and Aunt Roxy's home teaching, and they had cats too. And so we went in the kitchen door, but we'd always go around and into the front room to sit down. And so I snuck in there and threw it on a rug. And then we come back in. They didn't notice that I had even been gone a minute. And
you need to tell him that Aunt Roxy was very particular with her housekeeping.
oh,
Just
immaculate,
spotless.
Immaculate. And so then we walked into the front room, and she looked down, and there was that on that rug. She about had to come apart. She grabbed that rug by each end and started out, and as she walked by, reached on and picked it off, and she stood there, and Uncle Eve just laughed and laughed. Arliss had to hoot too. But I enjoyed doing tricks too.
Then my dad was a, what do you call it? Broke horses in his earlier years. Horses to ride, he would break them so that you could ride them nicely, I guess.
The old timers said he was a good cowboy, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
He could ride those horses and break them. Well, your dad roped a deer once too, didn't he?
Yeah, he roped. He even went to Rob's class and told about it, didn't he? He roped a deer and tied it around the tree and hit it with a rock, wasn't it? And then he got the horns. He had the horns mounted, but I don't know whatever happened to him. But I did have a picture of that somewhere. And my dad your Grandpa Terry went on a mission to Missouri. In those days, you didn't know where you were going to stay, and you didn't have very much money in your pocket, and you relied on people to just wherever you went to feed you and put you up for the night. And so that's going with how did they put it? Without purse or script. And but he was a good missionary. And there was one time that he helped a family because he had learned the violin from his uncle, Uncle Heber Holt. That's Stan Holt's dad, was his uncle. And he learned to play the violin from Uncle Hebe. And so there was one time that he and his companion went into a home, and they had a violin, but it wasn't working. So Grandpa was able to restring it and get it working for him, and that opened the door for them to be able to teach that family. But Grandpa Terry, my dad, had a very strong testimony. Anytime you would hear him speak or give his testimony, you just felt the Spirit so strongly because he had such a strong testimony. And he was, I think he was a counselor in a bishopric at one time, and on the High Councilman. And he was a big tease. I think we told you a few things that he did, didn't we? But he was well liked by everybody in town. He run the Terry Smirk down here where Carter's. Well, it was by the bank at that time, but they tore that store down. But I remember we'd go anywhere from 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, especially during the harvest time, to be able to be open when people went to work so that they could get something, and be open late at night when they got through work to be able to get something for the nighttime. So there was many hours that during the harvest time that we stayed open.
Well, back in those days, we brought in a lot of Indian folks from down off the reservation, Navajo, to help pick the potatoes because they picked them in sacks. Mm-hmm. And so they stayed open so those folks could come and buy stuff at the store.
My mom was a second grade teacher. She taught both of us in the second grade, and I thought that was the most fun thing to have my mother as a teacher. But, you know, she made me do my work over a lot of times. I thought I could get away with that stuff from her, but I couldn't. Anyway, and when I got in the older grades, why she would come and have me draw pictures on her chalkboard for the different seasons of the year. And so I thought that was always fun, that she let me do that with colored chalk. And then just do some pictures on the chalkboard for her. And then I just go and play with all of the things that she had for school, and play like I was a teacher, and a lot of things. You know, just be around her, and it was just fun to be in the classroom with her, you know, when she was preparing for the next day. So, and she was very, what shall I say, conscious of other people and what they were going through. And she always would take biscuits and bread and all kinds of things that she'd bake to other people. And, you know, just because. And then she and her sister, Aunt Della, lived just down on the other end of town, but they got together every afternoon and just spent hours just visiting. And her daughter and me, Dawn, and I would just play while they were visiting. So, but now people don't visit that much, or if they do, they think it's too long. So, but that's what people did in those days. And I remember some of the older, not older, but the ones older than me that were married, and watching them drive around town and just visit with each other. They'd get in the car and just drive around town and visit. And you'd see them pass and you'd think, oh, they're visiting again. You know, just about a whole carload of ladies that would just go drive around and visit. But people don't do that much anymore. We didn't have TV and we didn't have air conditioning. And well, I don't think it was hot in our day as it is now. I think it's hotter now. Anyway, maybe it's just us. We didn't notice it. But Mother was really good at doing poems, writing things. She was a good speaker, a good lesson. She gave many lessons. She was a teacher in different organizations. But she always was busy doing something. And she used to get up early in the morning. I remember one morning I heard her up, so I got up and got dressed and went into the kitchen, and she says, Colleen, what are you doing here? She says, I'm just going to bed. It's not time to get up. So I went back to bed. But anyway, I love to get up early in the morning and just play jacks. That's another thing we did, was we played jacks. And that's a ball and some little things that you flip over and throw them out, and then you have to pick them all up without losing the ball or without losing the jacks. Anyway, I'd sit there in the kitchen and do that while she got ready she would get dinner ready before she went to school. And she'd do dishes and other things. And I sit there and play jacks. just be up there with her when she was up. So I guess that's why I like to get up early. Well, my grandparents, my grandpa and grandma Adair, they lived down on the other end of town. And every Christmas, they would walk up to our house, which was just a block away from here, and be there when we opened our presents. And, you know, that was cold for an older couple to get out early in the morning and walk up here. I don't know that we would do that, but that was just what they did. They just walked up and was there when we opened our presents on Christmas morning. And I always thought that was such a neat thing. And I think they gave us $1, you know, for our sock that morning. And I thought that was
That was a lot of money then.
Yeah, most wonderful thing in all the world. So
I can remember the house there, and wasn't the steps go up the outside of the house and into his little shoe repair shop?
Yes, he repaired
shoes.
He was a he called him a
Cobbler. Shoe
Uh-huh.
cobbler.
And he had taps that he would put on your shoes. I remember Grandpa Terry, that's my dad, loved to put those taps on because they kept his shoes from wearing out, the soles of his shoes. They put some on the toe and on the heel. And
little metal strip.
Yeah. And we loved to have them on our shoes because we could just
make noise.
Tap, 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 tap. Oh my gosh, if that wasn't fun. And he would always fix our shoes for us. But it was so fun to go up there, and he had this great big equipment that he worked with, and everybody in town would come and have him half-sole their shoes when they wore out. Then he'd put a new sole on their shoes so they didn't have to go buy new shoes. And he was just a good man. And we always went, in the summertime, we went to Pine Valley for a week and went camping. And he was always the first one up. He had a big fire going early in the morning and then would cook breakfast. And it was just a fun time. He loved to take all of us go camping. My mother, it was my mother's side of the family that went. And her sisters were the ones that went with their kids. For work, what my grandpa did, he was a rancher. He had cattle, and he had hay, grass hay up to the ranch. Is a little bit different than hay that you have elsewhere.
Wasn't alfalfa, it was grass hay.
Yeah,
just a grass
hay. But they had a home up there, and that's where my dad was born, was up to Terry's ranch. And when he went on his mission, they couldn't find a birth certificate for him because he was just born there, and so they had to have people. He thought it was so funny. He says, "I've got to have people say that I'm alive and that I was born." He said, "Can't you see that I'm here?" Anyway, they had to have somebody verify that he had been born at the ranch because they didn't have a birth certificate for him. So anyway, he had to have that done before he went on his mission. They went to England, he and Mom. They loved it. But so that's what Grandpa did. Grandpa Terry was just a rancher. Cattle. And they've got a picture of being there at the ranch house with a deer out front. They had a pet deer that they had right there by their porch that they had a picture taken with it just right there. So I'm sure they'd had a lot of fun times there, except when they had to ride down to Enterprise on the horse. So my dad did that quite often. So
The thing I remember about your grandma and grandpa Terry, mostly your grandpa Terry he was older and we were just a little older, but he bore his testimony every week or every month.
Every month.
I can still see him standing there in the chapel that we have, and down just one or two benches from the south side.
Mm-hmm.
And he would stand there and to bear his testimony. And then I remember that he would, your mother and dad would have him over to eat, and we would eat there some of the time, and so I would give him potatoes to eat. You remember? And one time he said to me in the middle of the summer, "Lavon, what do you think's wrong? Some of those potatoes you gave me, I didn't eat them, so I planted them and they've never come up." And I said, "What?" He says, "What do you think I should do?" And I said, "I think you should forget it. Those were treated so they wouldn't grow. They're not going to grow. Why didn't you tell me you wanted to plant some? I'd give you some that would grow."
Oh, that.
But he didn't realize what they were, but I remember that about him.
He was a good man. My grandma had a stroke and wasn't able to get around. She was more or less bedridden, and I would be working at the store, and Grandpa would come down, and he would sit right across from me. There was a counter here, and then he'd sit over there, and he'd just visit with everybody that come in the store. Just visit. He loved to come down there and just sit and visit with whoever come in the store. And Grandma Terry would call him on the phone and say that she needed him. And so he would just rush right out the door. He wouldn't stop to do anything. He says, I've got to go. And so he would hurry as fast as he could. It was only a block away from where they lived and the store was. And he would hurry back and go help her. And then once in a while he'd come back down in the afternoon again. But he was a very spiritual man, very... he wanted to go on a mission, but he let his younger brother go, and he gave him the money that he was saving for his younger brother to go on a mission. So Grandpa Terry never went on, my Grandpa Terry never went on a mission. And, but he was bishop for years, wasn't he?
I was going to say 15, 20 years or something.
So
Back in those days, once a bishop, almost a bishop.
Always the
most of your
bishop.
life.
Yeah, yeah.
We had great-grandparents, didn't we?
We did. We did.
I remember my granddad, Randall. I don't remember my dad ever taking me fishing. And yet, in later life, my dad was a big fisherman. So I never did really get into fishing, but my granddad Randall took me the day before, or the night before fishing season opened. There was a couple of times that he took me with him camping up to go fishing up to the reservoir. And I can remember being with him up there and spend a little time. But back in those days, grandparents, most of them were really quite poor around here. There wasn't a lot. And my grandfather, Randall, Henry Randall, spent a lot of his life being a sheep herder. He herded sheep for a man named Dick Thorley over at Modena. Dick Thorley had a big sheep herd, and he worked as a sheep herder for Dick Thorley. And I guess there was times that he would, when they would lamb and have lambs and so forth, that they'd call them doggy lambs. And so their mother wouldn't take them, because a lot of times they had to have triplets, but they wouldn't take all of them. And so those doggy lambs, they'd die if someone didn't take them and do something with them. And so my granddad would bring them home, and he had several, and he would raise those lambs and raise them to be sheep to sell. And so he had those lambs around the yard a lot. And it was, my grandmother was going to go to some kind of an affair, a funeral or something, somewhere she needed to go to, and out of town, but she wanted a new dress, and she asked Grandpa if she could get a new dress, and that the one she had she didn't really like very well, or that wasn't very good. And so he told her, why don't you just dye the dress and make it look like a better dress? And so she decided that she would do that. And so they were outside, and she brewed up a big pot of hot water out there and put the dye in it to put the dress in to dye. And some of these lambs come running by and spilt the thing, and it spilt some of that dye onto the lambs, and dyed the lamb a little different color. And so they had some of these lambs running around, that one or two of them had a little off color, and there was a fellow that come by and wanted to know, when he saw it, he hadn't seen that color of a lamb before, and wanted to know if he could buy one of those lambs. And my granddad said, well, I don't know. I usually just raise them out. And the guy said, well, I'll give you $20 for that lamb, and that was a lot of money then. And so he said, well, okay, I'll do it. And so he sold the lamb to him, and he got thinking about that, and he thought, gee, if people like a different color lamb, maybe what I could do is dye some more of them and sell them as colored lambs. And so he started to dye some of those lambs a different color to try and sell. And in fact, that got to be such a good business for him and everything that he became known as the biggest lamb dyer in southern Utah.
Oh dear. Another story.
All of it true, but the lamb's part of it. No, he was a sheep herder and he did work, but he didn't dye any lambs. And he wasn't a big lamb dyer. That's whoever told the story was the lamb dyer.
We did have some good grandparents, though.